Hi, everyone.
So good to see you, Asima.
So good to see you. I wasn't speaking. I thought maybe I'm disturbing. The process is about to start. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening. On behalf of Women in Security, Conflict Management and Peace, WISCOM, I extend a very warm welcome to the speakers and participants of the webinar on Gender Equity in Higher Education, a US-India dialogue. I also welcome viewers who have joined us for the live stream through Facebook. WISCOM is a South Asian initiative that works on women's leadership in international relations and peace building. Engagement with educational institutes is one of the key aspects of WISCOM's work. We are following up on the celebration that happened on Monday with the Sahas Awards. The webinar this evening is really a coming together of the ideas that have animated our work in the higher education space. Many of you around the table are awardees, speakers, and leaders at the partner educational institutions that are part of the HAMSA Campus Equity Initiative of WISCOM. We have an illustrious panel of speakers from the fields of international relations, politics, policy, and law. Professor Rangita De Silva, Associate Dean for International Affairs at Carey Law School, University of Pennsylvania. Professor Krishna Menon, Dean, School of Human Studies at Ambedkar University, Delhi. And Professor Christy E. Kelly, Associate Research Scholar at Columbia University and visiting faculty at Drexel. A very warm welcome to all of you. We have amidst us representatives from the Public Affairs section of the US Embassy, New Delhi. They have provided support to WISCOM's HAMSA Campus Equity Initiative. I invite Mr. Anthony Miranda, the Cultural and Educational Affairs Counselor, US Embassy, New Delhi, to deliver the opening remarks. Mr. Miranda has recently joined the US mission to India. He has earlier served at US missions in Germany, Afghanistan, Bulgaria, Spain, and more recently, the US mission to the UN at Geneva. Mr. Miranda, I know this must be one of your first engagements with civil society leaders and academia in India. So a very special welcome for you, Mr. Miranda. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Seema, so much for that introduction. I am really honored to be joining you today and representing the US mission to India. And you're right, I'm recently arrived in New Delhi. Tomorrow, in fact, marks only my third week living in New Delhi, and I cannot think of a better opportunity to mark my first public engagement as the Cultural and Educational Affairs Counselor than to participate in this important conversation on gender equity in higher education. Now, I must start, of course, by thanking you, Meenakshi, for your leadership in facilitating not only the discussion that we're about to have today, but also for the work that you've done over the past 2 years through the cooperation of the US mission to India and WISCOM in bringing together such an extraordinary group of US and Indian professors and higher education administrators. Those folks who are joining today are really at the forefront of path-breaking initiatives to make higher education spaces in both of our countries more equitable. Of course, Seema, I also want to thank you for that lovely introduction again, and Diksha Potter for all of their work in shaping this important discussion that we're about to have. And as Seema mentioned, and I want to as well, recognize and indeed celebrate the very special guests who have joined us this evening, the Sahas Awardees. Seema mentioned that WISCOM had just organized this award ceremony to laud the outstanding work of these educators, administrators, and youth leaders who have really been working hard to improve gender equality in higher educational institutions in India. So my hat is off to all of you. And of course, lastly, I do absolutely want to extend a very warm welcome to my fellow panelists and to all of the larger group of experts and educators who have joined us today to share their expertise and experience. Now, for the United States, gender equality, whether we're talking about higher education or the workplace or just society writ large, that is an incredibly important topic. And at its base, it's really about ensuring that all individuals can reach their full potential and that the societies can benefit from all of their citizens' talents. In the States, I think we have a long history of identifying challenges that we faced and then developing solutions to make higher education campuses safe and more inclusive. That work continues. Of course, it's not over. And that's true not only for higher education, but in all spheres. It requires a long-term commitment to ensuring that all people, regardless of sex or gender identity, are treated with dignity, given equal opportunities, receive equal pay, and are given the opportunity to contribute to the economic growth and prosperity of their country. I'm really delighted that we've got educators like Christy Kelly. I know Seema had mentioned her as well in her introduction, who is a Columbia University research scholar and Drexel University visiting fellow. Professor Kelly has collaborated with WISCOMP, sharing her experience and expertise about gender audits with educators and administrators in India over the past 2 years as part of this US Embassy sponsored project. And it's professors like Christy and also Rangita De Silva and Krishna Menon, and you're going to hear from them in a few moments, who are really revolutionizing our thinking about how to make classrooms and campuses safe and welcoming spaces so that men and women can thrive. At the US Department of State, we work collaboratively with countries around the globe, with whether that's governments, universities, civil society, it runs the gamut. And of course, the same is true for India. And we help strengthen the US partnership with India through our cooperation with organizations such as WISCOMP, organizations that are catalysts for change, that bring together experts who can share knowledge and expertise, who can foster out-of-the-box thinking, and really lead to creative solutions to make people's lives better. So we at the US Mission to India really look forward to continuing our collaboration with individuals and organizations that are working to create the building blocks that promote gender equality. And that's true whether we're talking about higher educational institutions or just society as a whole. So I just want to thank you for including me in this evening's panel discussion, and I very much look forward to hearing the conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Anthony, for highlighting the many ways in which the collaborations are working between India and the US at multiple levels, not just in the academia. I would now invite Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath, Director WISCOM, who will moderate the panel discussion. But before I request and hand over the mic to you, Dr. Gopinath, I would like all the participants to know that we will invite comments from around the table after the panelists have spoken. And we will also request the panelists to respond to some of the questions and comments that are posted on Facebook, should time permit that. So over to you, Dr. Gopinath.
Thank you, Seema. And many, many thanks, Anthony, for that truly splendid opening. And welcome to everyone around the table. It's such an honor to have you here with us this evening or this morning, depending on which part of the world you are. The galaxy of educationists, feminist educationists, thought leaders, policymakers, scholars around this table, and the formidable expertise that they bring makes my task both easy and daunting. Easy because this circle is a veritable powerhouse of knowledge, experience, and very, very rich engagement around issues on engendering higher education spaces. And daunting because within the limited time available for a little over an hour, my job is to get this rich mosaic of perspectives to weave the tapestry for this evening, and also to steer away from unwarranted interruptions. And in addition to that, there is, despite its many potentialities, like bringing so many of us together from near and far into this room, the whimsicality of technology. So if I'm thrown out of the Zoom room on account of a power surge, or what in India we call a power cut, I'll request Seema to please step in so that the music can flow seamlessly and effortlessly. So drawing really on the resonances of the Sahas Awards, the inspiring stories and journeys of those honored at the ceremony, which most of you were able to witness, some issues on gender equity in higher education persistently pop up on the radar, quite literally demanding attention. And also, in the spirit of good feminist practice, asking for what Shweta calls collaborative explorations on pathways for the future, and the much needed new script or the new scripts for a new denouement. And they broadly coalesce really around some perennial questions, some newer contemporary concerns, and above all, the unfinished agenda of substantive and not merely numerical equality. In the higher education space that is ideally meant to be transforming, transformative, ruminative, democratic, inclusive, dialogic, several patriarchal practices still abound and obstruct substantive equality. Even when there is sort of a near numeric parity, as in India, where about 48.6% of the 37.7 million students are women. And that's quite mind-boggling, that figure. And a minuscule number, a truly minuscule number, are in leadership positions. So how can we begin to make redress possible, redress this imbalance? And after all, women are the most underutilized resource in the world today. So within the academy, can gender audits be a possible tool to make a beginning? And as Christy demonstrated to us, can we look at organizational structure and cultures? Can we look at management practices? Can we look at our curriculum? Can we look at student services? Can we look at the vision and mission of the HEI, or the Higher Education Institute, in terms of how it communicates within its community and to the rest of the world? And then what are the infrastructural facilities that it provides? Are they gendered? Christy, I hope I got those right. Have I been a good student? Okay. So, and what kind of interrogations are really possible within what we call the feminist classroom? What are its specific contours? How would bell hooks, and I must thank Krishna for introducing me to bell hooks. How could bell hooks' teaching to transgress translate in cultural contexts where fault lines of class, caste, religion, and race intersect with gender considerations? How does intersectionality, which is really a buzzword within feminist vocabulary, speak to migrants, to refugees, to the nowhere people, the casualties of globalization? And how can transversal solidarities be built to sustain feminist networks and to reclaim connections across borders and boundaries, like Salma Malik is doing with us today from Islamabad? How do we ensure that the processes of gendering our campuses does not just end up, as it does mostly in India, with add women and stir? And why is it that even today, on most campuses, especially in India, gender studies programs are largely untenanted or undersubscribed by men. What does it mean in terms of everyday experience to be a male feminist teaching gender studies? Aishik Sarkar should be here, and he would, I think, probably speak to that much better. And Sanjay is here. Sanjay has been doing that work for so long. So is there a way to overcome ghettoization? How specifically do toxic masculinities manifest in the academy? And what does seeing like a feminist really mean? There are still several misconceptions and rather unflattering stereotypes around the notion of feminism itself. So is the backlash that Susan Faludi spoke about several, maybe a couple of decades ago, is that still in the past, or how does the academy address it today? And what about the ethics of care? Is it still being collapsed conceptually in our discourse with motherhood? I won't say motherhood and apple pie, but motherhood, and is it still imprisoned within the femininity discourse? Another very important issue that came up in our workshops, in our WISCOMP workshops, was how can higher education institutes work to break the false binaries between productive and unproductive work. And these are binaries that systematically undermine women's contribution to social capital. Do colleges and universities, especially in India, unwittingly replicate the sexual division of labor? Does what Kathleen has called benevolent patriarchy, uh, like benevolent despotism, does it hide systemic exclusions? Because women leaders also buy into these styles of functioning, decisive, top-down, directive. And this is a question I think that Rangita will hopefully address in her address. Or is it possible in our leadership styles to highlight connectedness, the Tao of leadership, the softest, strong paradigm? Is it possible? And also for women not to hold back, but to bring their many achievements, intellectual and academic, unfettered to the fore, along with their caregiving responsibilities. So do we still need to lean in to masculine notions of success and mobility? A recent survey, for example, demonstrated, and Krishna will speak to this, I'm sure, a steady decline in the submissions to journals from women, a steady decline during the period of COVID. And then again, COVID, the big elephant in the room. We have Professor Karen Warner here from the School of Nursing, Public and International Affairs, University of Pennsylvania. And she will speak, she knows exactly what impact this has had to health, to public policy, and also to notions of security. So there is this inherent contradiction that exists. COVID has given recognition to the so-called frontline warriors, to the caregivers who are mostly women, but it has also laid them more vulnerable, especially in India, in terms of exposure and without adequate protective gear or insurance. I don't know what the situation is like in the United States. And of course, we all know how domestic violence has increased exponentially during this time. And yet few women in India are in the policy and planning space where COVID policy making is done, or COVID uh, attenuation is done. So on the other hand, COVID has forced us to examine our consumption patterns, our acquisitiveness, our rapacity of nature and so on, or even our work-life balance. But has it made us more reflexive about a deeper species crisis that threatens the values of our shared humanity? That's a question that perhaps the academy could address. In India, there are close to about 4,000 women's only colleges. In most parts of the world, they are a vanishing breed. And therefore, laurels to Jane and Bryn Mawr for sort of really keeping the flag flying for the rest of us. But the question to ask is, are they cloistered spaces? Or do they have the potential to imagine an alternative public civic sphere? And Babli does that, I know. Vijay Lakshmi, who perhaps is here, does that, where notions of power and participation and democracy and indeed citizenship are interrogated almost every day, and new vocabularies are seeking to find utterance. And we have, luckily, around this table, women who have led some of the finest HEIs in the US and India. As I said, Professor Mcauliffe, Babli Moitra Saraf, Vijay Lakshmi Nanda, and of course, the inimitable Atima Sharma. What can they do to combine theory and practice and find potential voice for the women that go through the portals of their institutions? How have the movements for political and social change that have been led by women, initiated by women, have they deepened democracy in any way? How different have these movements been in terms of their style and politics? Rukmini, I'm sure you would respond to that in some way. And women in the STEM subjects, it's interesting. Women are not absent in the STEM sphere in India. And they're also, in a sense, manning the Mars mission. But then look at the vocabulary. Whenever we refer to the Mars mission and women in the Mars mission, the Indian Mars mission, or the mission to Mars, we talk about how they are manning the mission. So is this problematic for her story? And we need to ask those questions. And again, how has the trajectory against sexual harassment played out? How has it played out? Have there been some unintended consequences? Can higher education institutes step in to rectify the gaps? From Anita Hill to Tarana Burke to the recent Bostock case, which I'm sure Anita will allude to, where employees against discrimination on account of sexual orientation and gender identities are protected. And in India, post the Jyoti Singh case in 2012 and Justice Verma's amazing report that not only led to the anti-sexual harassment law in 2013, but also enshrined a unique Bill of Rights for women. And of course, through the path-breaking, I will call it path-breaking, Saksham report, which pointed to pervasive misogynist practices on our campuses through the Pinjra Tod agitation, which many of our illustrious professors instigated in different campuses. This has been an interesting trajectory, but a very uneven one. Few steps forward, several steps back, and so on. So we've witnessed also on our campuses both the triumphs and the tribulations and the unfortunate casualties, if I might say that, of the Me Too movement. So are we now ready and able to craft a vocabulary that moves out of victimology and reclaims the leadership of women, where leadership is a verb, constantly re-examining, contesting, revisiting our own certitudes? And I think the media here, particularly people like Niluva, have such an important role to play in this process. So such a future really needs a shared vision. It needs collaborations and the openness to walk together. But above all, it needs a liberating and not a domesticating pedagogy. So collaborations matter. They have always mattered. They are mutually empowering. Many of our feminist foremothers, like Anandibai Joshi, the first female practitioner of medicine in India, and Rukmini reads autobiographies and biographies of our foremothers with great interest and transmits them. She found tremendous support in 1886 at your university, Christy, Drexel University. She was the first woman doctor in India, and she went overseas at the age of 20, wearing her 9-yard or 6-yard sari through the winters. And and then if we can think about Pandita Ramabai, who pioneered women's education and spoke out against caste and gender discrimination, and she was a social reformer. She traveled the length and breadth of the US to garner support for her cause at educational institutions and philanthropic institutions way back in 1887. And she raised for herself the then princely sum of $30,000 in a year or so of her sojourn. So they too shattered glass ceilings and they sort of stormed the Bastille or the male bastions of privilege. And they faced opprobrium, they faced social opposition, but the collaborations have continued apace, especially in education. If you look at the Indian Institutes of Technology in India, many of them were set up through these Indo-US partnerships. And then last but not least, and I just stop here, the Equal Rights Amendment of 1972, ERA, and the Towards Equality Report in India of 1975 were important, very, very important turning points in her story. Today, again, we are at an inflection point, as Rangita has said. It's the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Platform, the 20th anniversary of the Women, Peace and Security 1325 resolution, the 75th anniversary of the UN Charter. And we are also still engaged with Dalit Lives Matter, with realizing CEDAW and the potential of the SDGs, with Malika Joseph works with on and about consistently, and with also preserving our constitutional rights, our right to freedom of expression, and many others, and still grappling with the new inequities that COVID has brought to our doorstep. But we are, as always, striving, aspiring, and never yielding. So over to Rangita, who brings her wealth of legal knowledge to bolster and enhance gender knowledge and craft new metaphors for leadership for a world that is waiting to be born, Rangita. So over to you.
Thank you, Meenakshi. Thank you, Meenakshi, for the power and the poetry of your words. And in honor of my distinguished colleagues in the US and in India, and in honor of this auspicious day in history, as you see, I'm in white. And I honor the suffragists 100 years ago who fought for the 19th Amendment of the US Constitution, which gave some women, but not all women, the right to vote. It is a story of exclusion, and it is part of the unfinished revolution of women's rights in the US and around the world. Fast forward 100 years later, in 2020, Kamala Harris, the daughter of a proud South Asian mother, a woman who calls herself a daughter of South Asia, is the first woman of color candidate for vice president of our nation. And she captures the very spirit, the zeitgeist of our nation. She's an immigrant, a woman of color, a woman whose mother has fought against the twin forces of racism and sexism, in whose mother's house gender and race equality was a given. And today's dialogue, spearheaded by WISCOM, strengthens the bridges across and between our two nations at an inflection point in world history. It is, as I have said before, the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. And in thinking back to the history of the United Nations, we thank two women leaders, Eleanor Roosevelt, who was the architect of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which proclaimed the inalienable right to dignity, inherent dignity of all. But it was the Indian woman representative, the Indian woman leader, Hamsa Mehta, who made sure that the language was not sexist, and who made sure that the language, which stated originally that men were born free and equal, was changed to all human beings are born free and equal. Language is not innocent. Language is powerful. And we owe it to Hamsa Mehta, this Indian leader, for the inalienable rights to dignity that we now celebrate 75 years after the birth of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We also mark the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Platform of Action and the coming together of over 70,000 women in Beijing exactly 25 years ago. We also celebrate and mark the 20th anniversary of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, Security Council Resolutions 1325 and its 9 progeny, which claims a seat for women at the table in resolving war and in maintaining and sustaining peace. The Sustainable Development Goal 5, for the first time in the history of development, sees that women's empowerment and women's leadership is an development imperative, and that the absence of women costs in development currency. So why I mark these anniversaries is because I see the classroom as a powerful microcosm of the public sphere. Just as much as the classroom captures the forces of the public sphere, the classroom has a role to play in soft power diplomacy. The classroom has a role to play in influencing, informing, and shaping the public sphere. And we are now at a tipping point in history. We face one of the biggest public health challenges of our time, an economic crisis, a racial justice crisis, which have all created fault lines, divisions, and fissures, which exacerbate gender inequality. But I think the biggest crisis that we face is a leadership crisis. And leadership is the crucial challenge of our time. For most of recorded history, men have held nearly all of the most powerful decision-making positions in both war and in peace. And many of the leadership theorists are men. And their theories are driven by and informed by male experiences of the great male war hero in all of our great epics in our different civilizations, whether it is Homer's epics or the Ramayana. I think it is the male war hero who has center stage. So how can we rewrite those epics and those stories and create new narratives that redefine leadership in the image of both men and women? So when we look at our classrooms, we see that across the world, in classrooms, in business schools and in law schools, we see that women are a majority in the classroom. However, what we see is that although half of law and business students are women, women make up only 21% of equity partners in our big law firms. Only 33 of the Fortune 500 company CEOs are women, and only 3 of those are women of color, and not a single Black woman is a CEO of Fortune 500 companies in 2020. Women's underrepresentation is pervasive and persistent and lacks parity in every field. But behind the data, and we are big on data in business schools and in law schools, there is a story of exclusion, discrimination, stereotyping, conscious and unconscious biases, unpaid caregiving, unequal pay, systemic racism, and systemic sexism. Much has been written about sexism in the workplace, but little has been done to address the multiple categories of racism and sexism. Gender is only one axis of identity. Recent data from the World Bank, because I want to show that this is endemic and pervasive around the world. And the World Bank's data reveals that in 90 economies, women are excluded from many types of employment. And in 50 economies, lack laws protecting women from sexual harassment in the workplace and in academic institutions. Only 40 economies have paid parental leave that can be shared by mothers and fathers. So how do we address this lacuna, this paucity in the laws and the policies in our nations and in the world? McGregor Burns, the father of modern leadership theory, has made a distinction between what he calls transactional leadership and transformative leaders. Transactional leaders are managers who solve routine day-to-day problems. Transformative leaders, on the other hand, have a higher moral purpose. And that is what this dialogue is all about, that higher moral purpose, a loftier vision for the world to solve the great challenges of our time. And for the first time, I think in recorded history, we saw the leaders of business and in law coming together, at least aspiring to solve the higher problems of our nation. In the wake of Black Lives Matter, business leaders across the tech and the legal and the business industries came together to make commitments to address the legacy of 400 years of structural racism in the United States. So I want to end with a manifesto. And I have 6 action points for this manifesto. First is we need to see the intersections. The Bostock case ruled that intersectional identities and discrimination against intersectional identities is part of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And what it does, it shows that gender is only one axis of difference and that women are defined by their multiple identities of race, class, religion, ethnicity, migrant status, disability, and sexual identity. Second, it is important that our classrooms also see that diversity is both a moral case as well as a business case. It is a fact that diversity pays. It is both a moral issue and a macroeconomic issue. Exclusion is costly, and we cannot afford exclusion. It is estimated that the number of women lacking legal protection against sexual harassment in employment and education costs the world GDP 1.5 billion and 2.2 billion. So when our nations are unable to remove or unable to actualize sexual harassment laws in classrooms and in Congress and in the workplace and in business and in the highest portals of decision making, it costs billions of dollars, which we cannot afford. McKinsey global report, the latest report in 2020, Diversity Wins, Why Inclusion Matters, reaffirms the strong business case for diversity and ethnic and cultural diversity, both gender diversity and cultural and ethnic diversity. Companies that are diverse are more likely to outperform less diverse peers on profitability, 25% more likely to be more profitable than their less diverse peers.
Rangita, I'm sorry to barge in, but can we wrap this up?
Yes. The last 3 points. The last 3 points is that the most important issue facing classrooms and businesses is the second generation discrimination. Second generation discrimination is about implicit and conscious and unconscious bias and gender sidelining. So what does that mean? That daily indignities that women and minorities face amount to 1,000 paper cuts. And for many women, these obstacles they face at work are more difficult to pin down and have less opportunities to address than overt discrimination. So this manifesto must make sure that unconscious bias is addressed. And then finally, how do we ensure that male allies are part of this discussion and that male allies have a role to play in advancing gender equality and diversity? And finally, the most effective step that can be taken is to get women into positions of authority and leadership. And that is why when women like Meenakshi Gopinath or Jane Mcauliffe enter a room, it changes the power dynamics. Thank you, Meenakshi. Thank you, Jane. And that is the still point of a turning world, to share a line from T.S. Eliot. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Rangita. You really set us off on a fantastic trajectory. Can we steal that speech of yours at some point? It's just been so inspiring. Thank you. I now move to Krishna. Krishna, congratulations. You were awarded yesterday for the, for prajna, which is wisdom and knowledge. How do you coalesce all that? How do you make your classroom transformative? How do you make it how do you infuse it with ideas? What ideas do you infuse it with? What is democracy for you? What is Nai Talim for you? What is feminist Talim for you? And how do you infuse that into the classroom space, among other things that you do? Thank you, Krishna. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gopinath, for inviting me to share my thoughts on gender equity in higher education. There is no denying that our universities, both here in India and in many other parts of the world, are using these uncertain times to introspect on the nature and purpose of knowledge creation and dissemination. Far from being a global leveler, this pandemic has become a revealer of injustices and inequalities across the globe. Justice, specifically epistemic justice, requires that we in the universities acknowledge these inequalities and make meaningful interventions. It is against this backdrop that the questions of equity, access, diversity, and democratic transformation of the higher education campus spaces acquire a renewed significance. Higher education spaces in India, like elsewhere, are expected to be centers of knowledge creation and dissemination, and are of course charged with the responsibility of creating skilled professionals who would be employable. In addition, in India, the university is conceptualized as a space that provides to young people the possibility of imagining a different India. A different India which is free from or moved away from the hierarchies of inequalities based on caste, gender, and so on. The university space, thus in India, is conceived of as an important catalyst for the democratic reimagination and transformation of Indian society. With over 900 universities, 40,000 colleges, and 10,000 standalone institutions, India has today the largest system of higher education in the world, and the second largest in terms of the sheer numbers of students enrolled. This is a unique moment in the history of higher education in India. Groups that were hitherto unable to access these spaces are today claiming their rights as citizens of India to be a part of the higher education space. They recognize the centrality of education in this project of democratic transformation. When we think of gender and the higher education space, we need to remember that it is not a discussion only about women, but about how men, women, and people of all genders are learning to rearrange their relations and interactions. How do different genders, intersected by a whole host of other identities, such as caste, religion, etc., how do they learn to coexist and work with each other within the paradigm of a democracy. Universities today in India are, as Dr. Gopinath said, no longer predominantly a male space. In fact, close to 47.6% in 2018 were women students. The enrollment of women students on Indian campuses, of course, hides the unevenness of female enrollment. The elite technology, engineering, and management institutes still have a predominantly male presence. These figures, the unprecedented entry of women into India's colleges and universities, is a part of an overall democratization of access to education, thanks in large measure due to the constitutionally mandated provisions of reservation of seats in higher education based on caste. However, upper caste students and faculty continue to dominate the university spaces. Muslims and persons with disability in particular continue to be underrepresented. Equal access to higher education has undoubtedly brought about a huge change on our campuses, with diverse groups of Indian society finding a representation amongst the student population. However, unless this formal equality is experienced in substantive terms, the transformative potential of higher education in a society such as ours would remain limited. Institutional suicides. Student suicides that are to a great extent an unfortunate consequence of the experiences of exclusion, discrimination, and harassment faced by students from backward and Dalit communities on Indian university campuses is, to my mind, one of the biggest challenges facing higher education in India today. The student body has thankfully become much more heterogeneous than before. And this has important implications for curriculum design, pedagogy, the readings that the faculty assigns, evaluation patterns, cultural and other activities on campus, residential facilities, library access, fee and scholarship, placement programs, and of course, governance structures. In other words, all aspects of the university need to be revisited from the vantage point of these new groups that are accessing higher education spaces, often for the first time. The old is not giving way easily, and the young are impatient. This explains to a very great extent the tumultuous scenes that we witness routinely in higher education spaces in India. Unless universities learn to do this, they would be complicit in perpetuating epistemic violence. The existing space of the university in India was organized around a normative student who, it was assumed, belonged to a certain kind of socio-economic and cultural background. But that's no longer the case. The greatest challenge facing the higher education space today is to make it relevant, meaningful, and welcoming to the so-called new student. How well we do this would determine the extent and strength of the social transformation that we hope the university space will facilitate. Coming through all these developments, of course, has been the growing presence of women across every group. And yet, the fact is that for many young women in India, the experience of accessing higher education is also simultaneously an experience steeped in violence. The violence faced at home, on the streets, on public transport, while on the way to the university, in the shared student housing. And then there is the experience of violence on the campus itself. Unwelcome and unwanted sexual advances from peers, and of course, the ever-present threat of sexual harassment by the faculty. Women students, especially those from marginalized backgrounds, often report that they experience university structures and faculty networks as exclusionary and sometimes violent and intimidating. And yet, young women are not ready to give up. Therein lies the hope and the story of resistance. Young women on Indian university campuses have organized themselves into groups that challenge the entrenched power hierarchies and a culture of silence and that surround sexual violence. However, they no longer see these as isolated experiences of violence or individual experiences of violence, but are rightly able to place this in a larger structural context of the political economy.
Krishna,
Professor,
may I
yes,
sorry come in and cut you short? Sorry, I hate to do this, but
this is the last. This is the
thank you.
last.
Thank you.
Professor Mary Jong draws our attention to an exceptional situation in India, where we have near gender parity in access to higher education, but very low proportion of women in gainful employment. Of course, a small proportion of women with their privileges rooted in caste and class have found lucrative employment in the new economy, thus effectively reproducing the social hierarchies that exist in Indian society. The structural violence of exclusion from gainful employment reinforces and acts in tandem with the individual instances of violence that the young women encounter when they step out of their communities and families to access higher education. At a time when more and more women are reaching out for higher education, the chances of secure employment are shrinking for women in India. This in turn increases their dependence on families and relationships with men, thus increasing the possibilities of violence. And yet, initiatives such as the Hamsa project led by WISCOM and the many struggles led by young women fill us with hope that the university campuses would be more equitable, just, and free spaces in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Krishna. Thank you very much indeed. We'll steal your presentation as well, and we'll have this wealth of insight. Just for the information of everyone, the student suicides that you mentioned, just want to share with you that one of them was a young man called Rohit Vemula, and his mother participated came into the WISCOM Sahas Awards, and she must have derived great comfort from what all of you are doing to advance equity and inclusion in society. Over to now our guru, Christy Kelly, who actually introduced us to the many challenges and the opportunities of gender audits. Christy, could you share with us your own experience across cultural contexts and how this works? Does it work? Does it sustain? And what is needed to keep it going? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meenakshi Gopinath. It's wonderful to see you all here today. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this. And also congratulations to all of the awardees who are here. You're such an inspiration. So I'm gonna just talk very, very briefly about how I got involved and met with all of you, and then what we've sort of learned from the project and where we're going from here. So despite a vast scholarship on gender and organizations, most academic institutions imagine their policies, processes, and practices as gender neutral. This is despite a growing scholarship since the 1970s that show this is not true. And in fact, more recent literature is documenting the way that gender intersects with race and ethnicity, caste and class, global positionality, and often mobilizes around heteronormative binary constructs to reify patriarchal structures that have been put into place in the founding of our universities. I developed an intersectional gender audit tool at Columbia University with my own students who were studying gender mainstreaming policies around the world and how this was impacting development practice. We designed the tool as a form of soft activism, a way of using our researcher lenses to study our own institutions, the places that we work and the places we study. So rather than thinking about studying something out there, we wanted to look internally and critically reflect on our own practices and use that data to advocate for change within the institution. This was begun in 2013, and we carry through this year as well, adding a new virtual component as to what it means to be studying remotely online, as also gendered hierarchical practices. I was delighted about 3 years ago, I think, to meet the WisComp team at a conference where we were all presenting on a panel today, and Dr. Gopinath invited me to share some of the tool aspects with her institution. And that's how I got involved. So I just want to applaud the 25 universities, the US Mission, for thinking about ways of piloting this tool in new contexts. So what have we learned? What are the differences working across institutional and country contexts? And what are some of the similarities, and where do we go from here? So in thinking about this, I think it's really important to recognize, as we all know, as scholars, context matters. We have differences at our own universities, at our own institutions, and those are our starting points, right? Those differences are actually our strength. We have different resources at our fingertips, different institutional histories, politics, and we all deal with different complexities of issues that intersect with gender. So each university was able to start from their positionality as a unique institution and go from there. Some of the similarities that I think worked for our institutions were a commitment to social justice, a commitment to gender equality, a commitment to safe campuses, and the best work environments for our own faculty and staff, and the best learning environment for our students. I've learned throughout this whole process over 2 years that change is possible, but it takes leadership. If it wasn't for the university presidents, the department and school chairs, if it wasn't for the time that they put into creating their pilot baseline studies and involving all of the necessary stakeholders, both within their institutions, within their communities, among parents, among leadership, it would not have been possible. Gender audits also require support from outside experts, facilitators, and cheerleaders who encourage us, who inspire us and motivate us to reach beyond what we think is possible. It requires open minds and a willingness to see and mobilize around our own privileges and imperfections as we get up out of our armchairs and apply our researcher skills to studying and changing our own institutions. I am completely inspired by all of the work that you have done, and I look forward to long collaboration. I'm also really excited that my own university, Drexel, is now inspired by your work, and we have a proposal on the table to do a gender audit this year of our School of Education and our College of Engineering. And as a university that is committed to applied research, I think this is a wonderful way forward, so we can see that one idea at one institution can travel around the world. We now have gender audits going on in the UK, in Kazakhstan, and in Ghana. So I look forward to long collaboration and perhaps a conference in a year where we can all share our research experiences and write up our findings and inspire others as well. Thank you to the WisComp team and to all the universities that have been part of this process. It's really been a wonderful 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you very much for that. And of course, Anthony is here and he'll make sure we have that conference next year. So thank you very, very much. Friends, we are only halfway into our program, and I'm going to make a small demand on your time if you don't have to rush to class or wherever, because it's such an exciting conversation and I possibly can't get myself or bring myself to cut it short. My team is taking notes, extensive notes, and we'll all be dining out on all your various insights and quotes. May I now invite Kathleen to just share. You know, she, as you know, you've seen in the note that was circulated that she works both in the United States and now currently she's at the O.P. Jindal University, which is located in Haryana, which is the bastion. Well, which is not very, may I say, it's not a particularly gender sensitive space. However, it's a very, very elite and university and has produced some remarkable students and has some amazing faculty. My question to Kathleen would be, would you be able to share perhaps 2 recommendations or initiatives to senior management that you think are workable in terms of expanding the scope of gender sensitive initiatives across different university spaces. And you've been such an amazing inspiration for us, Kathleen, and been a co-traveler. Thank you for all that you did to make this happen. Thank you. Yeah,
well, thank you. Thank you very much. And, you know, please do not be afraid to stop me in my comments on this. So I've learned so much from you, Meenakshi, Seema, and the entire team. So it's a real pleasure to be with you. You know, when I was thinking over this question that had been directed towards the participants, and I feel from my experience at the university that hiring and the places where women are hired is one of the most critical areas that we can look into. But, you know, you can see statistically, we have a good track record of women being hired, but let's see, where are they being hired? What are the positions they take up? And why do women stop at a certain point? I believe that having real effective committees working to push for search committees that contain really 40% women, this is the recommendation, and at least one person from an underrepresented minority. I'm really pleased, I forget who said it, but the idea that diversity and gender should not be separated because they really come out of the same kind of inclination. So I feel that that's something that's very important, but how are we going to change this? How are we going to work? Well, I think we have to have real gender sensitization programs. We do it for students as a requirement. There's a UGC requirement. We have excellent sexual harassment programs, which aren't always implemented, but I think we do not put enough emphasis on gender sensitization for administration, faculty, heads of departments, and people, especially who are working in the HR departments. Oftentimes we have an outside group that comes in, we notch the box, we tick it off and say, we have gender sensitization for all. But how effective is it? And that's why I think we have to have a multi-representative group who looks at these programs carefully, make them important, make them essential, and then carry out follow-up programs in them. Because without this, we're not going to change attitudes that have been built in and accepted for a long, long time. Now, Meenakshi, you have also mentioned that we are an elite university. There's a hub of fairly elite universities in Haryana. And another part of this, and I'll stop there because my main point is really search committees, hiring, and how to change the perspective of that, but also to look at who your target audiences are. So you're going after an elite population, and maybe wittingly or unwittingly when you are recruiting for students. But we have to make that sense of diversity, gender sensitization, a new look at what this is bringing to the university, to the skills students, faculty, administrators will learn, place this in prominence, because we all know having more women increases creativity, gives another way of looking at a situation, and also brings attention to women and the way that they work. It validates women's place, and women are their own validators. I think we don't need spokespeople from men who will tell us what we're doing right and wrong. But once women are given the voice, then women validate what they're doing in quite a discreet way, a silent way, and it shows in the work that's being done. The other point is, why do women stop moving up the ladder? There are a variety of reasons, but one of them is making it a priority that we have women in real decision-making positions, and make it interesting economically and career-wise for women to take up these positions. Okay, that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. May I now call on Professor Jane Mcauliffe? You know, as president of WinMore, you've had the opportunity to bring in a lot of scholars from around the world. And what has been your particular experience in terms of building these networks, collaborations that strengthen women's leadership? And Bryn Mawr has offered to the US so many political leaders as well, as Nobel laureates and so on. So would you share that with us, Professor Mcauliffe?
Thank you, Meenakshi. I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to. I realize now that there's an echo that's been created, so I'll try and overcome that. You are a perfect example, and you will remember that during the years in which we were heading our respective institutions of Lady Shri Ram College and Bryn Mawr, that it was precisely collaboration at the leadership level that helped us to instigate programs, to pilot some programs that then had the effect of bringing our student populations together. We did this with kind of clunky technology before we had something like what we're using today, Zoom. It seems to me that in this precarious period of the COVID lockdown and what that means in terms of online education for so many of our institutions, both in the United States and in India, that we actually have an opportunity to stimulate some of these connections between our student groups using this kind of technology, and perhaps using our study abroad offices, which right now are not sending students anywhere, but could be utilized to start connecting students on platforms like this for the sorts of discussions that we're having this morning. And I was really struck by Professor Krishna Menon's comments about the issues of inclusion and diversity and equity that her campuses and other campuses are dealing with. And those are exactly the same ones that have erupted with increasing force in the United States over this summer, over these most recent months, and which we will now be addressing with ever greater attention as our universities and colleges go into their fall and spring semesters. You know, India and the United States they're not exactly the same problems, but they are within the same spectrum of issues. And I think connecting our students, connecting our faculty for really substantive discussions about these issues and what their individual institutions are doing about them could be an important takeaway from this moment.
As always, inspirational. I guess you know that you've been my hero for a long time. I'm going to ask Salma Malik, who joins us from Islamabad, Pakistan. He teaches international politics. What can scholars like you do, really, to overcome the walls of mistrust that infects generation after generation of our respective countries that are obviously at the moment not talking to each other, but we have kept our conversations going. I know you've been a role model for many of your students and many people in South Asia who look to you to find a kind of bridge between diverse cultures. So would you like to share some of that in your experience? Thank you, Salma.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gopinath. Hello, everyone. It's such an honor to be part of such an august and honorable gathering. I'll ramble because I'm short of words. few things that I would just like to add here is Dr. Gopinath, Seema, and the Viscom team knows more than anything that each time I was physically, and some of my colleagues who are part of public sector universities, partly linked with the government, had to travel to India. There were umpteenth visa and procedural hazards that we had to overcome. And I would take a cue from the discussion that was just taking place that this pandemic situation has provided us with an excellent opportunity where we don't have to apply for visas, not seek any permission, and just at a click of a Zoom meeting, talk to each other without any problems. I mean, for many times, I actually had to get a different type of invitation for Pakistani participants to be in India. So, I mean, and this is the part and parcel of how the South Asians have transcended the conflict space in the narrative. But having said that, I think we did come a long way. But I think today is a great opportunity because we are simply not talking to each other officially. So I think these channels really need to be tapped into. As a female academic, I would say that in Pakistan, and I really welcome you all whenever there's an opportunity to be in our country. There are those typical aspects that you're all familiar with that you keep hearing about suppression and the rights violation, and Pakistan being very low on the gender audit, etc. However, at the same time, I'm part of a public sector university, and I have seen that there are girls who are more serious in joining very hardcore masculine spaces and subjects such as strategic studies, I being one of them. And when they take it seriously, quote unquote, for many of them, it's just an opportunity to do a degree. But for many of them who are actually involved in the process, they outshine their male counterparts and colleagues. And that is such a fascinating thing to see. But unfortunately, they readily agree to the fact that these areas are not for them, and they have been pushed to do a master's or an MPhil or a PhD program, despite our telling them and guiding them that you're investing very precious years of your life. So go for something which is close to your heart. If this is close to your heart, invest your fullest in them. But they have done a lot of great work. And Viscomp remains actually a role model for us where we can use these energies to come forward and use this space and all. I think there's a need to do a lot more in this. But unfortunately, what I have seen in my experience, that whenever women are made part of the conflict narrative, they're always portrayed as helpless victims, uh, and they're never taken as conflict drivers or never as those who are also part of the narrative of the conflict or the conflict speech, if I may use this term. And when they're part of the official dialogue, because they're very few in that dialogue and they have been incorporated, they mimic the stereotypical stuff that is being said, and they try to outdo the masculine space that is around them. And I think what we really need to realize is that as women, we can bring a different voice to this particular forum, and unfortunately we are not doing that, at least not in the track 1.5 2 dialogue. Most of the dialogues that are taking place in or have been taking place in South Asia, unfortunately not many are taking place now. So how do you work around it? Interestingly, we have some within Pakistan, some very fascinating organizations such as the Peace Education and Dialogue Forum, the Sabaun, which was actually working in hardcore conflict areas where no NGOs or civil society organizations were allowed to go. But it was a woman-led initiative where women were working on de-radicalization, especially of potential suicide bombers, working with young boys and also women who were very conflict ridden. And actually in Sawat and some trouble spots in Fata, it was realized that it was the mothers who were motivating their sons in the name of religion and jihad to go for the holy act and do what they have to do and prove themselves to be men. And these were the initiatives which were led by women, and they're also providing them legal services. So there's no dearth of that. So we can exploit those spaces. But I think given that there are few very pertinent conflict spaces at the moment in the region. We must exploit this online space that we have as much as we can and come together in dialogue on any type of controversial issues. Most of the time, my apologies, men don't take us seriously. And I think that is the best opportunity that we have, that we can really talk on some very serious matters, come up with a policy document. I, for once in Pakistan, I'm now part of a gender, peace and security group, which is going to report to the Prime Minister on any of the policy issues that the government is working. And we would try to sensitize them on these key aspects. So if we can put our energies together and come up with some good policy relevant issues, it can really help us build that connection that has been broken between India and Pakistan and even throughout South Asia. Thank you so much, Dr. Gopinath.
Thank you very much, Salma. And here's to our common aspiration for peace in our region, sustaining peace in our region. I wonder if Oishik Sarkar is around the table, and because I don't seem to be able to see him, but I thought I might just request Sanjay. I know he has to leave for another meeting. Would you just come in very, very briefly before you leave, Sanjay, and talk about the challenges you faced in terms of working with men, especially in Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh, which are really the bastions of patriarchal practice. Is it possible for you to just briefly share?
Yeah, actually, I have worked with various universities and colleges based in Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh. And as you know that both the states are very traditional, and I belong to Varanasi. So my university is based in Varanasi, located in Varanasi city. It's very religious and traditional place. So basically, the challenge that in universities, our universities is that most of the students, whether they are male or female, they come from single sex colleges, so they don't understand each other. So you will see gender based segregation in the classrooms. So what I used to do, what I started to work with them in 2003, that I organized, I created a lot of spaces to get them mixed up. So I started a theater group with students so that they can write scripts together on gender and gender-based violence and sexism and dowry related problems. So this way I created a lot of spaces for them to interact with each other and to understand each other. Main challenge what I faced from teachers, actually my colleagues, they asked me, and my head of departments, they said me that what are you doing here, why are you doing, there should not be there should not be mixing of girls and boys in the university, otherwise they will get corrupt, characterless like this. So this was a challenge. Other challenges was that I found that there that I since I started these trainings and workshop and theater groups, so many girl students started coming to me and they just complained me that they were being harassed by some teachers. So I spoke to the vice chancellor, and I'm thankful to that vice chancellor that he was very supportive to me, and he said that you just bring those girls to me and I will take actions. So for the first time in my university, 4 to 5 teachers, they were punished, they were demoted, and their increment were cut. So but another challenge got up that most of the teaching faculties, they arose against me. So whole university teachers, they were against me, and they said, why are you doing all these things in this university? You are bringing a bad name to the university. But by that time I had more than 200 to 300 students behind me. So it was just they encouraged me to fight against the system. So this way I worked there. and the situation is still there. Though many due to punishment of many teachers now, the rate of sexual harassment by teachers is a little bit decreased. So this is.
Thank you, Sanjay. That's why you were awarded with the Sahas Award, because you had the courage to stand up and be counted.
Thank
And
you, thank you,
also,
thank you.
we are all familiar with this moral policing and this protection that goes on across campuses in India. Thank you very much. I know
Okay,
you
thank
have
you.
another meeting to attend.
Yeah. Thank you, thank you all, thank you all. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Vijay Lakshmi Nanda has just joined us. As I told you, she's the principal of Miranda House, ranks first on the National University rankings. And you won't, she looks like a student, but she's actually the principal of the college. And so I welcome you, Vijay Lakshmi. You've also been involved with a lot of work around mobilizing around rights, women's rights, and the rights of young women especially. And a lot of your research has to do with these movements and activism. How do you bring all that into the experience of the lived experience on your campus?
Thank you, Dr. Gopinath, and thank you, Seema, for calling me to this particular initiative. It's indeed a learning for me. I was here since Krishna has been speaking. It was very unfortunate I couldn't be here from the beginning, but it's a huge learning, and it's also at this point of time it provides me the positive energy that is required, which comes in from a sisterly solidarity of listening to these voices. So I'm indeed grateful to be a part of this. In terms of my own learning from the movements, it has been a learning where we have learned from the young women in our campuses. And like Krishna said, it is the positive energies of these women who are on the side reading Pandita Ramabai, reading bell hooks and the others, and bringing it to the classroom, bringing it outside the classroom, disagreeing, all these disagreeable women who make it so vibrant. So I'm indeed grateful to those women, because they are the ones who are teaching us, and not just me. I mean, I have learned a few things from Dr. Gopinath and from CWDS and my dear friend Krishna here, or Seema. But there are other teachers who are not exposed to some of these beautiful learnings, and the students bring it to the classroom. So in a sense, the pedagogical tools of the flipped classroom that are being taught now very much within the online mode has already been a part of Miranda House or Lady Shri Ram College. As you know, our students do tell us how to move forward. At the same time, I would say that, being in charge of the institution, there is a particular role that we play. And what comes in from the gender audits that I have witnessed from Viscomp at the Kalinga Institute of Social Sciences, where I was there as a part, is looking at the range of diversities. I mean, here we are looking at public institutions, you're looking at private institutions, you're looking at regional areas. So the range of information does help us, and being embedded in that learning did help me. Apart from the learning that is there for 27 years within the women's movement, that was a learning. And all of that learning we have been able to get in, Dr. Gopinath, in terms, as far as the college is concerned, to be able to set up, without any funding, a policy center and gender lab. Where the young people actually lead the programs, and we are looking at research, we're looking at documentation, and the most important part of that is that we are not going to quote unquote add gender and stir, and we will be led by these young women. So we are also looking at a range of diversity and inclusion, the intersectionality audit that is there with gender and diversity. And there, I think the most, I think what we are trying to bring in is what I call epistemic modesty. Learned from Gandhi or learned from Ambedkar, we are trying to bring in epistemic modesty, where we can step back. The pandemic has taught us that none of these epistemies are working. So epistemic modesty, humility, looking at non-hierarchical leadership, for me, that's been the collective learning. And this collective learning we're trying, in fact, right now at this point of time, you are aware, we are doing a coordinated faculty development program with Odisha, with the Ramadevi Women's University. And the Pro-Vice Chancellor has also said that we should make it a part of the so-called co-educational colleges and bring them on board. I'm happy to learn from all of you here. But yes, at this point of time, we are struggling with other things about diversity, especially in accessibility and affordability. So there is class which has come up as a major intersection and regional in terms of online learning, and that is an obstacle. And also using the gender tool, it is perhaps one way for us to participate, to be part of this process. And yes, one more, and I'll end with this because there's so much more to say, but I'll end with this, is that we are also engaging with a lot of young women whose parents have lost their jobs at this point of time. So through a feminist solidarity, understanding, we're trying to develop ways of reaching out, looking at how we could support and enhance solidarity across and look at peer learning, peer mentorship. And the other part that has come up is through the Sexual Harassment Act. And I understand now we have to engage with intimate partner violence. And a lot of young people are in, relationships where they are in live-in relationships where they are experiencing, especially in the lockdown. And I think now the sexual harassment law because since we are working from home, needs to look at intimate partner violence. And as a college, we are also engaging with that. So a range of issues, yes, we are learning and we are happy to be with you and learn from you. I look forward to learning more from this program. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Vijay Lakshmi. I know we are really short of time, but I'm going to ask Meena Chawla, who's taught at American University, has taught for many years on the Delhi University. And she's been an invaluable source of support and inspiration. In fact, it was she who designed for us the Hamsa logo. And she drew from different cultural and aesthetic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the Indic sort of mythologies to put this together for us, because Hamsa means the cosmic swan and the font of knowledge. And so, Meena, you are a real pro at sort of online teaching and learning. And we are now talking about women and the digital divide. What do you think? How does this resonate for you? Do you think that it's possible for us to build an equitable classroom through technology, given the huge class differences that Vijay just talked about? Thank you.
Meenakshi, first of all, I'm completely taken aback. I was enjoying the discussion and the wonderful insights that have come through, and I had no idea I was going to be asked to speak. So this is just off spontaneously. Thank you very much. Yes, I have been experimenting a lot with the use of technology in the classroom for the last 8 years now, while I taught at university campuses at American University and Georgetown a few years ago. And I'm a product of DU, so I also know this side of the divide in a sense. I think technology is going to have the same kind of challenge about providing equity in opportunities as we have looked at caste and class and access. I think technology is perhaps one step more of a challenge. And this we have to now acknowledge, because the way that education had to be, the way that educators had to be catapulted into a completely digital environment in March has exposed for us two aspects. One is that it's very different to say, yes, everybody has a cell phone and we use WhatsApp. And on the other hand, to say that, yes, educators are also very familiar with using social media, but teaching online and being able to deliver content and create teaching and learning environments is a whole other ballgame for which we need very, very deep and intensive training. Because flipping the classroom is not really about just saying, I talk and you listen over Zoom, but it's really about how do I refashion my syllabus? How do I redesign my assessments? How do I redesign discussions, and so on and so forth? That to be followed by the question of equity. We've also been able to see in the last few months the rather regrettable reality of how access to technology that is powerful enough to be available as an ethos for learning is a very different thing. I know that there is a movement to be able to hand out cell phones to students. I don't know if that's the solution, but I think in the midst of all that is being done to create better infrastructure, I think this has been an important learning moment for policymakers to say that we can't really carry on. What's this debate about? Should we have the entrance exam or should we not have it, which is today's news? But unless those people have access to the learning that we are trying to give, if it's not reaching them, that's a lot of food for thought.
Thank you very much, Maina. I'm going to make, I know we are running hugely behind schedule. I have a couple of more people whom I thought I might invite, and I'll have to not uninvite some. I'm sorry about that. But we have Shweta Singh, who's at the professor at the South Asia University. A very interesting space, a new experiment in our region of bringing students from different parts of our region to actually engage, to learn together, and so on and so forth. Come from very different cultural backgrounds, especially views on gender are, you know, very, very different. Some are very challenging. How do you address this issue? I mean, is there a shared template that you develop? Is there some way in which
thank you.
If you're not,
Thank you, Dr. Gopinath.
Thank you, Dr. Gopinath.
And while hearing everyone, I was just thinking about how our classroom spaces are very, very different. We draw in students from all over South Asia, and I remember hearing the whole idea of intersectionality. And when we are talking about intersectionality in the classroom context, it's a very interesting space. It's an interesting space because if I'm talking about the composition of the students, I would have a Hazara student along with a Pashto student, along with a Tajik student in the classroom. So there is this whole context of ethnicity that plays out very differently. There's also the dimension of religion that plays out differently. So how is it that, you know, we are able to traverse? I think it's something which is still in progress. I don't think we have a definite template, but one of the things that definitely we've been doing is the idea of engaged pedagogy. Dr. Gopinath talked about bell hooks. And I think for us, the idea of engaged pedagogy is particularly important because we engage with the idea of emotion through the idea of both dialogue and dissidence in the classroom. So, and I say the word dialogue and dissidence in the classroom because the idea of education is intricately connected to the idea of agency and freedom for many young women. And that is something which is so important, and that manifests in terms of addressing the many cultural stereotypes that we are talking about. Just to give you a very small example, for instance, when we have the student elections, and we have 30% reservation in terms of the student bodies that we have for women. But why is it that a woman from Afghanistan would contest for a cultural committee and not for a hostel committee, which is supposed to be a very, very masculinist space? So I think the idea of dialogue and dissidence in small ways plays out in our pedagogy, both in formal spaces in the context of the classroom, but more importantly, also in the informal spaces, which is beyond the classroom, which is the hostel, which is the campus spaces, which is the cafeteria, and quite a few other spaces. So I think at the South Asian University, for me, the idea of everyday, for me, the idea of informal spaces through the idea of engaged pedagogy comes very clearly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very interesting. May I ask Karen Warner to join us, because we are all in the midst of COVID, and you being located where you are there some insights that you can offer to make this whole experience of negotiating the everyday, both the personal as well as the professional for women? And what kind of public health issues does it throw up? And what is it that we should address in the academy? Are you there, Karen?
Thank you so much for the question, and again for the honor of just being present among all of you. I'm so humbled. You're all brilliant and so beautiful. So in the, you know, I have other thoughts I would like to share as well, but as a professor of nursing on our campus, of course there are many rules that we're following, the public health agenda and criteria day by day. So it's we're very, very careful to protect our students as well as our patients and the whole university environment. So it's from that standpoint, we are very cautious and following the constant feedback from our leadership at the university, who is monitoring and getting feedback from other universities. And there's so much collaboration occurring to provide guidance. So at my level, at the professor's level, we follow and adhere to the guidance we're offered. Medical students, nursing students, that has been also a challenge. We just trying to plan for clinical spaces for our students in this environment. Again, they have to abide by the policies of each of the places where they do their clinical practice, which differs among them sometimes significantly on the type of mask that they are to use and that kind of thing. So I know that's a very general comment, but at this point, I think we're all very much following what I've heard this virus called a ghost. We can't see it. We don't know how it's transferring itself from one to another. So it's this is really an uncharted territory. If I might offer some other comments, may I, on the topics that we're discussing today. Many of our speakers today, especially Dr. Ranjita De Silva, I may have mispronounced your name, I apologize. You spoke of how important it was that leadership represent that we are a part of the leadership. And I would like to share that in my experience of many years in service in our country, and seeing the role of leadership in general, I agree that is absolutely critical. So whoever's in charge, the leadership sets the tone and the culture of any unit, any place, any organization, whether it's a hostel or a university classroom. So our presence and involvement in leadership is absolutely critical. And why is leadership so important? Leaderships set the agenda. We set the agenda on what the dialogue is at the table and what we talk about and what is a priority or not. So it is absolutely important that we mentor one another as we're doing in WISE and WISE Comp, that we allow, as others have also said today, we need to have a voice. We need to encourage our unique voice. And diversity is more than just our gender or identity or skin color. It is diversity of thought. And our leadership roles and our required leadership presence need to encourage diversity of opinions and thought from all segments and diverse career points, so that we can develop the future that we need to see. And we need to be a very large part of that. And sorry, there's so much to say. Another comment is our role in strategy, and that was also mentioned by one of the previous speakers. Women's presence in strategic thinking is also critical. How we all think differently based on our lived experiences, and I believe that our role in those areas is very critical as well. And anyway, thank you. I will stop. I'm a little flustered because there's so much I would like to say, and I apologize for not being well spoken at this moment. But thank you, ma'am.
Exceedingly well spoken, Karen. And I just want to acknowledge that WISE, the organization that you are a part of, Women in International Security, was an inspiration for setting up WISCOM. And we are partners. So just acknowledging that with deep gratitude. I know we're running out of time. I'm going to call on one more person, and I apologize to those who could not get the opportunity to share in this or to share their views. But I thought I might end with, since we're talking about pedagogy, we're talking about the classroom, we're talking about disciplines. May I ask Rukmini Sen, because she said something very evocative the other day when she was receiving her award. Where do I belong? Which discipline is my own? Where do I belong? And I think for a lot of us, a lot of you feminist scholars, practitioners, activists, this is a question that we might want to end on before we look also at future collaborations and taking this amazing, amazing partnership forward. So very briefly, Rukmini, I will ask you to jump in here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gopinath. And it's been a real pleasure and of course an honor to be part of this evening. Yeah, where do we belong? As as one in a classroom, this question of belongingness comes with respect to discipline, with respect to the use of pedagogy, innovation in pedagogy. How is it that during COVID times, there have been such multiple imaginations that actually happened around restructuring of the syllabus, changing assignments for students, etc. Those actually happened very fast. And that made us engage with questions about how do you broaden the contours of a discipline. So I think the question of belongingness is intrinsically connected with the question of rearranging of disciplines, rearranging and reimagining concepts, and the ways in which we would, the ways in which theory and praxis would coexist. In that context, I would just like to end by saying that while looking through the very recently passed new education policy, the National Education Policy of 2020, which actually very interestingly talks about use of multiplicity in pedagogy, talks about internationalization of education, talks about the importance of ensuring gender balance in enrollment and engendering curriculum. So all of this is actually part of the mandate of the education policy. One also feels with that question of belongingness and engaged pedagogy that there is a need for rearticulation of our commitment to the international principles of mutual respect and solidarity, enabling international human rights standards in higher education institutions. So to read in ethics of care and resilience on the one hand, and constitutional rights and international norms of peace and justice on the other hand, to ensure substantive equality in higher education is some kind of a way forward. And Hamsa has, of course, shown that way.
Thank you, Rukmini. In a sense, the wheel has come full circle. Rangita flagged this whole issue of rights and international covenants and so on. And it's interesting that you should say that. We had hoped, I had really hoped to hear from the awardees of the Sahas initiative, Atima Sharma Dwivedi, Rakhi Kalita, Shiba, and Lata. But unfortunately, the clock is not really, the bells don't toll for us today. So we are going to continue this conversation, and we're going to have several more such webinars. And then you are going to be billed as the star speakers to open the conversation. With apologies that I could not give you the time that, or even part of the time that you so richly deserve. And with folded hands, I apologize for that. I'm a very bad timekeeper. I try to tell all my colleagues at Wiscomp, never make me a chair, always make me a table. So, but they don't listen to me, you know, I always get outvoted. But before we end this beautiful evening, I would really like to acknowledge 3 people without whom this initiative would never have seen the light of day from within the organization, and 2 people from outside the organization. Seema Kakran, I mean, you all know how she really took this initiative forward on a day-to-day basis. And Nicholas, I apologize to you as well. I'd hope to hear you as well today, but we'll yield to Seema. And I hope, Seema, you will come onto the screen because you really need our applause. Congratulations. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Diksha Poddar, who's been there like a brick, young in age but wise in engagement. And she was going to give you the vote of thanks, which I'm going to hand it over to her at the end of this. And Shilpi Shabdita, who's been with us through this process, went underground for a couple of months to contemplate her navel and connect with the cosmos, but is back again. And really so delighted that she was also instrumental. You may have heard from her. So thank you. And as an old student of ours, Anasuya Sengupta, and I hope she's hearing us from somewhere, who's now in California, and she was heading the Women's Global Fund, had written a poem when she was a student of Lady Shri Ram College, which was given to Hillary Clinton, and then it was quoted in Hillary's book, and it was called Silence. And it said, too many women in too many countries speak the same language of silence. And now I think, and it's a long, beautiful poem, I hope I can send it to you. And you have, in many ways, broken the silences on your campuses, in your communities, and in the nation as a whole. And I hope the reverberations and the resonances of finding this new voice will continue to inspire us. So Diksha and Shilpi, would you come onto the screen? And Diksha, you can do your beautiful vote of thanks to all our fabulous, fabulous webinarians. And thank you all once again from the bottom of our heart. I cannot end without thanking Anthony for that beautiful opening, and even more for that fabulous backdrop that he's against. It's my favorite color. And I'm going to steal that color from him. And Mandeep, you've been there for us through thick and thin. A big long distance hug, a virtual hug to you. Thank you. I would have done that to Anthony, but I don't want to embarrass him right now. So anyway, so here we are. Diksha, do your little piece. Thank you,
Yes.
Diksha.
Thank you so much, ma'am. On behalf of my young peers and friends, some of whom are present here and others who are watching the webinar live on Facebook, I express my deep gratitude to all of you for the opportunity to be a part of this important discussion on gender equity in higher education spaces. We are very privileged to have all of you as our role models and mentors to guide us and to inspire us. Thank you, Professor De Silva, Professor Menon, and Professor Kelly for enriching the discussion with your experiences and insights. Your ideas on women's leadership, safe campuses, and possibilities of making them more inclusive and gender just through gender audits were truly inspiring. I especially thank Mr. Miranda for his opening remarks and setting the right tone for the deliberations that followed. A warm thank you to Ms. Mandeep Kaur from the Public Affairs Section, US Embassy, for extending her support for the webinar and Viscom Samsa project. A special thank you to Dr. Gopinath for moderating the discussion today and for conceptualizing this very important dialogue for the leaders from the university and colleges in the US and India. I express a deep gratitude to all our experts who made time to join us today from different parts of the world, despite their multiple commitments. Thank you for sharing your experiences, ideas, and thoughts with us. Thank you for those who have joined us through Facebook live stream and have engaged with experts through comments and questions. Thank you to Indian International Center, especially Ms. Tete, Head of Programs Division. This dialogue has certainly opened space to explore future possibilities of collaborations and partnerships between higher education institutions in India and the US. Thank you.
Thank you, Diksha. We've had a lot of questions come in to us, but unfortunately we'll have to collect them all, Seema, and respond to them via mail or forward it to the people who they've been addressed to. And Shilpi, you want to have the very last word, or do you want to break your silence? Do you want to come in?
Ma'am, good evening, everyone. It's been beautiful re-engaging with this space. I think just the energy that everyone brings here. Thank you. It's been a wonderful learning opportunity for me to just listen as a young person to such senior academics and experts. So thank you very much, and thank you, ma'am.
Thank you all once again. Thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you. Nicholas, are you back in Maryland now? Where are you now, Nicholas?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much
Let's close the Facebook streaming. Let's close the Facebook streaming.
Okay. Facebook is not very friendly towards friendly exchange.